Today, an indictment was unsealed.
U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith announced the third indictment against Donald Trump in 4 months on Tuesday, this time arising from the former president's efforts to overturn his 2020 election defeat, which Smith said fueled the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people.
The 4-count indictment alleges Trump conspired to defraud the United States by preventing Congress from certifying President Joe Biden's victory and to deprive voters of their right to a fair election.
You don't concede when there's theft involved.
Prosecutors wrote that Trump knew his claims that the election was stolen were false, but repeated them anyway to, quote, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger and erode public faith in the administration of the election. Meanwhile, Trump leads a crowded field of Republican candidates as he campaigns to regain the presidency in 2024. In a statement, the Trump campaign said he has always followed the law and characterized the indictment as a political persecution reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
Our investigation of other individuals continues.
The grand jury indictment also alleges Trump conspired with 6 other individuals to overturn the 2020 election results. The co-conspirators were not named, but one of them appeared to describe former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, the former head of the Civil Division who tried to get himself installed as Attorney General so he could launch voter fraud investigations in Georgia and other swing states. Another alleged co-conspirator appeared to describe Attorney John Eastman, who erroneously suggested that Vice President Mike Pence could object to certifying the election results. It all adds to the growing pile of legal woes Trump faces. Tuesday's indictment represented a second round of federal charges by Smith, who announced a separate 37-count indictment against Trump in July over his retention of classified documents. In March, Trump was indicted in New York over allegations he falsified business records related to a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. He has pleaded not guilty in both of those cases and has sought to portray the multiple prosecutions against him as part of a politically motivated witch hunt. Meanwhile, Trump faces a 4th criminal investigation by a county prosecutor in Georgia into accusations he sought to undo his 2020 election loss in that state. Trump was ordered to make an initial appearance in federal court in Washington over the special counsel's latest indictment on Thursday.
Another indictment from U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith was unveiled on Tuesday against former U.S. President Donald Trump, this time concerning his efforts to undo his 2020 election loss to U.S. President Joe Biden. The court papers charge Trump with 4 counts. They include conspiring to defraud the U.S. by preventing Congress from certifying Biden's victory and to deprive voters of their right to a fair election. Now, the indictment itself, it gets into Trump's actions in the days and weeks after it became clear that he had lost the presidential election to Biden. It describes efforts to get state officials to prevent from certifying their election results, and his own attempts to get his vice president, Mike Pence, to not let the electoral certification of Biden's election win move forward when it came before the U.S. Congress on January 6th, 2021. And what's most interesting here is that this is conduct describing what he did during the past election as he once again runs for election to try and become the Republican nominee in 2024, and then, if he wins that nomination, to try and be back in the White House.
There's stuff in here that I know is untrue. I'm deeply disappointed. I thought I was dealing with professionals, and I am so disappointed. This Trump derangement syndrome takes away your ability to reason, and it takes away your ability to be honest. It's an illness. What they did here is an abomination that will live in history as one of the worst violations of free speech ever in the history of a country that used to value free speech more than any country on earth. We can't say that anymore.
One thing is that, as the indictment stated at the outset, that it's not a crime to just lie. In other words, we have a First Amendment right to be protected in our speech, and particularly political speech is afforded the highest degree of protection. But the indictment shows that Trump was not just lying about election fraud, but he used those lies in order to try to subvert the will of the people and to actually overturn the results of a lawful election. And so the indictment goes through in very painstaking detail how Trump was able to perpetuate this lie and knew indeed that it was a falsehood. And then to show how he systematically worked with other co-conspirators to try to perpetuate this lie. The indictment shows the painstaking efforts that Trump took to try to establish that there was some fraud in the election, and that at every turn he was told by courts, by his advisors, by his attorneys, by his staff, that by the intelligence community, that there was no evidence of fraud. And yet you see in the indictment how he becomes more and more desperate. And although there is no smoking gun here, where he says, I know that this is false, there is evidence that he's being told this, and that the more this goes on, the more he is indicating he doesn't care what's true anymore, that he just needs to stop the certification of this election. This, in some ways, is the most serious because it really goes to the heart of our democracy and how we count people's votes. But on the other hand, Trump is going to argue that he believed this to be true, that he believed that he won the election, and therefore that he was not defrauding the United States, that he was not trying to take away anybody's vote. And so it'll be interesting to see how much of the trial is spent trying to defend the big lie, and how much the prosecutors will spend time showing that, in fact, all of this is a fantasy. I think the indictment is very meticulously drawn up, very detailed, but I don't see it as being particularly aggressive. Smith did not charge one of the potential charges of inciting an insurrection, and also was, I think, very balanced in explaining, what others told Trump and what he would have known. And so I don't see it as being an aggressive indictment, but I do see it as being a very thorough indictment. So I don't think I've ever heard a defendant say that a prosecutor taking time to do an investigation in a thorough manner could be considered prosecutorial misconduct. Often gathering evidence, putting them before a grand jury that doesn't sit on a daily basis, and making sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's is something that I think is respected in a prosecutor. So, the timeline is going to put us right, during the election, and, possibly even beyond. And I think, Trump's, best defense to many of these cases, I think, would be to actually be reelected and then to be in charge of the DOJ. And I think that's maybe the defense that he's most closely pursuing.